Near-Earth asteroid 2.5 million years ago. Imagine the Earth as a house. Around 2.5 million years ago, a not-so-friendly stranger visited this house. But instead of a gentle ring on the doorbell, it knocked the doors down and spread chaos throughout the living room. That happened when a massive asteroid, about a mile wide, barreled toward Earth. When it hit, it slammed into the South Pacific Ocean. The impact is catastrophic. It's like Mother Nature dropping the mic, except the mic is a mountain-sized space rock and the drop causes tsunamis hundreds of feet tall. These waves crash into coasts, drowning everything in their path. The ocean isn't just angry, but furious. The energy from the impact vaporizes seawater instantly, launching massive amounts of dust, debris, and steam into the atmosphere. The sky fills with a thick, choking cloud of particles that block sunlight. Without sunlight, Earth's temperatures plunge. Plants can't grow, animals can't eat, and the food chain crumbles like a poorly built sandcastle. If you'd been alive back then, survival wouldn't be about thriving, but would be about not getting squashed, drowned, or starved. The air would be toxic. Crops wouldn't grow. Big animals, the kind you might rely on for food, would drop like flies. Smaller, adaptable creatures like rodents and birds would have a better shot, proving that in the apocalypse, size does matter. You'd probably spend most of your time cold, hungry, and wondering how to outlive the apocalypse. Scientists think this near-extinction event wiped out many species. The ones that survived were either incredibly lucky, incredibly adaptable, or had a secret underground bunker. Marine life suffered, which probably explains why we don't have mermaids anymore. The massive tsunamis and changes in ocean temperatures have disrupted ecosystems for centuries. This wasn't the end of life on Earth, but it was close. Species that survived adapted to the harsh conditions, setting the stage for future evolution. If you were there, you'd understand one thing very quickly. Earth doesn't get much of a say when space decides to throw a rock at you. Toba super eruption 74,000 years ago. Let's say you're an Indonesian minding your own business around 74,000 years ago, but the Earth suddenly shakes, and before you know it, Toba, that mountain you admire every morning while sipping your coffee, blows the top of its head off, turning the neighborhood into hell on Earth. But it's not just a simple volcanic eruption. The Toba super eruption was like a volcanic temper tantrum on steroids. Imagine a volcano so powerful that it blew out 2,800 cubic kilometers of rock, ash, and debris into the air. That's enough material to bury a small country under a thick blanket of volcanic ash. When Toba erupted, it released so much ash that it covered large parts of Asia, Africa, and the Indian Ocean region. The ash cloud blocked sunlight for years. Without sunlight, temperatures dropped drastically. Scientists call this a volcanic winter, but it was more like nature hitting the dimmer switch on the planet. It made the planet colder, killed plants, and threw food chains out of balance. Many animals couldn't survive. If you'd been alive back then, life wouldn't just be tough, but a masterclass in survival. The cold, dark years weren't just hard, but were life-threatening. Some researchers think the eruption brought humanity to the brink of extinction. They estimate that as few as 3,000 to 10,000 humans may have survived. That's like your family reunion being the only survivors on Earth. The survivors likely lived in places where the climate wasn't as harsh, like Africa. They may have relied on small, hardy plants and animals. If you were there, you'd need to adapt quickly, finding creative ways to stay warm and fed. Adapt or freeze was the motto of the day. Mount Vesuvius eruption, around 39,000 years ago. Mount Vesuvius wasn't always about Pompeii. Around 39,000 years ago, it staged one of Earth's most violent eruptions, the Campanian Ignimbrite eruption. This wasn't a puff of smoke or a fiery show. It was a volcanic tantrum that nearly wiped out early humans in Europe. This wasn't a little puff of smoke. It was like Earth yelling, "I've had enough." The eruption punches so much material into the atmosphere it blocks the sun. Darkness falls, temperatures drop, and the planet cools. This volcanic winter is no cozy snow day where early humans and Neanderthals were making snow angels outside. Instead, it killed animals and kept crops from growing. No snowball fights here because you're hungry, freezing, and desperate. The ash spread like glitter at a kid's birthday party, except way less fun and 100% deadly. Imagine dumping gray, poisonous dust all over your backyard, only it wasn't just your backyard, it was thousands of miles. Breathing became a high-risk activity. Water turned into liquid disaster, and whole areas were buried under thick, suffocating layers. And then came the scariest part, pyroclastic flows. These were like fiery avalanches of gas and ash zooming zooming down the mountain at over 100 miles per hour. Anything in their way? Gone. Forests, rivers, animals, even people. It was like hitting the delete button on life. Neanderthals felt this the hardest. They were already struggling, and this eruption might have pushed them to extinction. Homo sapiens, your long-lost relatives, barely scraped through. You adapt or you die. That was the rule. But this wasn't just Europe's problem. The eruption sent ash and sulfur so high into the air that it dimmed the sun around the whole planet. The climate went haywire, making life miserable for years. It wasn't just a bad day, but was Earth's ultimate deal-with-it challenge. And somehow humans said, challenge accepted, and survived. Overexploitation in the Pleistocene, over 12,000 years ago. Humans in the Pleistocene were like kids in a candy store with no rules. They hunted animals for food, clothing, and tools. But they didn't just hunt a little, they went all out, targeting the biggest and slowest animals because they were easy to catch. This wasn't just survival, it was overkill, and it pushed some of these animals to the brink of extinction. Mammoths, giant sloths, and saber-toothed cats roamed the earth. They were like the megastars of the animal kingdom, but humans were relentless. They hunted them down with spears and teamwork. It wasn't just one person with a stick, it was groups of hunters working together, turning these massive creatures into dinner and coats. Climate change was also happening at the time. Ice sheets were melting and temperatures were rising, but the animals had dealt with this before. What they couldn't handle was humans hunting them faster than they could reproduce. They didn't have time to adapt or recover their numbers because human hunters were speedrunning through them. Animals were disappearing in a hurry. However, this extinction wave didn't just affect animals, but humans as well. Over 70% of megafauna or plants went extinct, leading to the extinction of different animals that were food sources for humans. It sparked a chain reaction, like a row of dominoes falling one by one. When you mess up ecosystems by taking out the big players, the balance changes. Without farming systems in place and fast food joints in each corner 12,000 years ago, you wouldn't have anything to eat when you've already eaten every plant and animal in sight. While humans nearly went extinct during this time period, survivors moved on by hunting smaller animals that rely on smaller plants. Humanity survived, but you can't say the same for saber-toothed tigers and woolly mammoths that now only exist in museums. Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. 12,800 years ago. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis essentially says that the Earth's sky was lit up by the biggest fireworks in history. But this wasn't a cool Disneyland fireworks show, but was more of a fireballs raining down kind of event. This hypothesis states that a massive comet exploded over North America without making an impact. But this space rock cameo was enough to throw the world off balance. Like nature's wrecking ball, it triggered wildfires across continents. Think of firestorms so big they make the horizon look like it's been set on fire. The smoke and soot fill the sky, blocking out the sun, temperature nosedive. The world freezes over again. This sudden chill wasn't friendly. It hit plants and animals first. Entire ecosystems collapsed like a house of cards. You'd watch as the food chain broke, and with it, your dinner plans. And it wasn't just the cold. These impacts sent shockwaves through the air, land, and water. Mega floods carved out massive valleys. Ice sheets melted in chaotic bursts, flooding coastlines. Meanwhile, dust and debris rained, covering everything in a grimy blanket. Back then, survival became your full-time job. Finding food was a gamble. Staying warm was a daily battle. Communities shrank and some vanished. Entire cultures disappeared into the cold, dark history books. It was a global reset button, with only the most adaptable getting through. The Carrington event, 1859. It's 1859 and the world wasn't as bright as today. There were no cars, airplanes, or neon billboards in every city. So when the sky lit up so brightly that the night looked like a daytime repeat, people were naturally shocked. This was the Carrington event, the biggest solar storm in recorded history. A solar storm is like the sun having a giant tantrum. It threw a huge amount of energy and hot, charged gas toward Earth. When it hit, colorful lights danced across the sky, reaching places that had never seen something like it before. It wasn't just pretty because telegraph wires, kind of like the internet of the 1800s, sparked and caught fire. Machines shocked people, and wires sent messages even when they weren't plugged in. Back then, people didn't quite grasp just how spicy the sun could get when it came to our gadgets and gizmos. An astronomer named Richard Carrington watched a big spot on the sun and realized it caused trouble on Earth. It was a cosmic post-it note reminding humanity that the sun could roast more than just marshmallows. If a storm like that happened today, it would be devastating. Our power grids could break down. Meanwhile, airplanes and satellites could fall from the sky. Worse yet, we might lose our precious phones and the internet, reducing humanity to sending smoke signals or carrier pigeons again. World War II, 1939 to 1945. It's the late 1930s and the world is a mess, with multiple countries angry and dozens of leaders hungry for power. Everyone's got armies itching for a fight. Then, in 1939, things started with Germany's invasion of Poland. This event was the spark that lit the match for World War II. This is as if a war is on steroids and went to the gym 10 times a week. Countries from every corner of the planet get pulled in. You've got the Axis powers, Germany, Japan, and Italy, against the Allies, basically everyone else, including the US, UK, Soviet Union, and China. And it's not just soldiers fighting, civilians are dying in bombings, genocides, and starvation. Death was having a field day, collecting souls left and right. Then, as if regular war wasn't horrific enough, Hitler's Nazi regime decided to double down on evil with the Holocaust. It's not just war, but a calculated attempt to erase entire groups of people. 6 million Jews, along with millions of Romani, disabled people, and political opponents are systematically murdered. Meanwhile, Japan was winning the worst neighbor contest as it invaded China and wreaked havoc across Asia. They kill millions, including civilians, in brutal massacres like Nanking. In the Pacific, they're fighting the US after bombing Pearl Harbor. Then there's the technology. This war introduces weapons so deadly they would make sci-fi authors jealous. Bombers drop explosives on entire cities. Submarines sink ships without warning. By 1945, the US created and used the atomic bomb, leveling Hiroshima and Nagasaki in seconds. Over 200,000 people die from just 2 explosions. By the time it ends in 1945, the death toll is mind-numbing. Over 70 million people, including soldiers and civilians, are dead. Cities lie in ruins, countries are bankrupt. On the bright side, this led to the creation of the United Nations, which is like the world's way of saying never again. Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962. The USA and the Soviet Union during the Cold War were like high school teenage girls who hated each other. They weren't fighting, but they weren't talking either. But any small incident was enough to spark a high school cafeteria food fight, and that was the Cuban Missile Crisis. The US and the Soviet Union are armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons. Tensions are high, and one wrong move could end life as you know it. Then the unthinkable happens. The Soviets start shipping nuclear missiles to Cuba, just 90 miles from the US coast. That's the Cuban Missile Crisis, the closest the world has ever come to nuclear Armageddon. It started when US spy planes spotted missile sites in Cuba. These weren't toy rockets, they were capable of hitting most of the US in minutes. President Kennedy demanded they be removed. The Soviets, led by Khrushchev, essentially responded, "Make me." A standoff began. For 13 days, the world held its breath. Every decision, every word, could set the stage for a worldwide nuclear disaster that could turn every city into ash. The US set up a naval blockade around Cuba to stop more missiles from arriving. Soviet ships headed toward the blockade. You could almost feel the clock ticking. Would they stop? Would they fight? Would someone accidentally sneeze and press a button? Backdoor talks began between the US and the Soviets. It was tense. Both sides wanted to win, but neither wanted a nuclear war. Finally, a deal was struck. The Soviets would remove their missiles from Cuba. In exchange, the US promised not to invade Cuba and secretly agreed to remove its missiles from Turkey. It was basically a game of you first, where the stakes were the survival of humanity. The disaster was avoided, but barely. One Soviet submarine commander even came close to launching a nuclear torpedo after misreading US actions. If not for another officer stopping him, you wouldn't be here watching this, because the world would have been turned to dust decades ago. Able Archer Exercise, 1983. It's November 1983, and the Cold War is at its boiling point. Nuclear weapons are ready to go at the push of a button. Then something happens that makes the world teeter on the edge of annihilation. That's the reality of the Able Archer Exercise, a military drill that almost became World War III and nearly sent your parents to fight a nuclear war. NATO, the alliance of Western countries, was holding a war game. It was a practice run to see how they'd respond if the Soviet Union, their biggest enemy, attacked. This wasn't just soldiers playing pretend like you and your friends do at the playground. It was serious. Codes, missiles, and high-tech communication were involved. It looked real, even though it wasn't. The Soviet Union didn't know those soldiers were just cosplaying a war. Tensions were already high because earlier that year, the Soviets shot down a passenger plane, killing 269 people, including Americans. Trust was gone. When Able Archer started, Soviet leaders thought NATO might be gearing up for an actual surprise attack. It's as if someone pointed a gun at you and said he was just pretending to shoot you. Naturally, Naturally, the Soviets went into panic mode. They put their nuclear weapons on high alert. Submarines moved into attack positions. Missile crews got the green light to launch if ordered. The world was a hair trigger away from nuclear war, and the Soviets were playing the world's most dangerous "we dare you" game. Luckily, nothing happened. Cooler heads prevailed. The Soviet leadership decided not to strike first. NATO's exercise ended, and the world exhaled. But it was close. Too close. Some historians believed it was one of the most dangerous moments in human history, all because NATO forgot to tell the Soviets they were just playing a pretend war. 1999 asteroid near miss. Imagine you're working for NASA and you scan the space radars for any possible threat of little green men closing in on the planet. But you realize a massive asteroid, 1999 AN10, is speeding toward Earth. This isn't some small space rock, it's about 800 meters wide. If it hits, it's game over for humanity. This thing could flatten cities, cause firestorms, and throw up enough dust to block out the sun for years. Crops would fail, billions of people would die. The asteroid didn't just fly by at a safe distance, it came uncomfortably close, just 600,000 kilometers away. That's only twice the distance between the Earth and the Moon. In space terms, that's practically a brush of death. Scientists were caught off guard. Telescopes spotted the asteroid only months before its near miss. You can't prepare for something that fast because it's like finding out about a surprise test in the morning. Governments didn't have plans for asteroid impacts. People didn't even know how close we came to disaster. If it had hit, the energy released would have been like thousands of nuclear bombs going off at once. While that wouldn't be enough to shatter the planet, the aftermath would have made Earth feel like a post-apocalyptic movie set. After 1999 AN10 passed, scientists knew this wasn't a one-time thing. Asteroids always hit Earth, but most are small and burn in the atmosphere. Big ones, though, can sneak up on you. Now they've started more seriously tracking near-Earth objects, or NEOs. Space agencies built better telescopes and warning systems, essentially upgrading Earth's antivirus software for asteroids.